Not many buildings become world famous for their ceilings. The amazing array of frescoes that Michelangelo painted over the course of 4 years is full of instantly recognizable scenes and attracts more than 5 million visitors annually. Naturally, there's much to be said about the creation of such historic art. Number 10. People hated it when the frescoes were restored. You'd expect the fact that an invaluable classic was having some work done to it to keep the elements from slowly eroding it would have been almost universally applauded, but when restoration was announced in 1986, art historians and others began criticizing the proposal. First, there was concern that the restoration process would backfire and damage the images, despite experimental work done on a designated portion of the ceiling to show the effectiveness of the technique. When it was completed in the 1990s with no evidence it had done any physical harm to the frescoes, the Grievances shifted to being concerned that, as a result of overcleaning, the Sistine chapel was left more bright and colourful than Michelangelo had intended. Still, even the harshest critics seem to admit that the images weren't ruined. Number 9. Tourists are a major threat. You'd think the frescoes would be relatively safe to the corrosive effects of tourists since they've had access to the building for 5 centuries and it was just restored. Since flash photography is prohibited, how else are the tourists supposed to affect images painted as high as 60 feet above them? Well, according to the museum chief, Antonio Paoluzzi, their sweat, skin flakes, and exhaled carbon dioxide are a significant problem for the restored masterpiece. He said that the Vatican was going to look into installing a system to regulate humidity and temperature, but as of recent times, no system has been installed. The management for the esteemed building seems to be inclined to adopt a strategy of restricting tourist access. Number 8. Michelangelo's first big color project. The claim that the Sistine Chapel was intended by Michelangelo to be less colourful than it currently is seems to have to do with his history with colours. Specifically, art historians found that he hadn't previously worked with colours. He was a sculptor who was best known for his famous David statue. None of his great sculptures were painted, as that would only distract from the fine work that he'd done with the shaping. However, he clearly seemed to know what he was doing. Number 7. Michelangelo didn't think he was up to it. Maybe what I just said made you think that maybe the church was gambling a bit when they commissioned Michelangelo to paint the chapel. Well, it seems that Michelangelo would have kind of agreed with this sentiment. He wrote in his journal shortly after receiving the commission that he was no painter. It just wasn't his area of expertise, but Michelangelo's true goal was a dogged pursuit of artistic perfection, so of course he wouldn't let fear and hardship hold him back. Also, the church paid him enormously in advance, and presumably he wasn't the type to give refunds. Number 6. World War II threat. When the Allies began the invasion of Italy in 1943, there was an extreme likelihood that the Sistine Chapel would be reduced to rubble. Bombing back then was very unreliable, and indeed a bomb very nearly destroyed Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. The frescoes at the Campostano in Pisa were completely destroyed, and it was 20,000 square feet compared with the Sistine's comparatively modest 12. Even with special units that were supposed to protect priceless pieces of art, now known as the Monuments Men, there wasn't too much to keep the chapel out of harm's way when Rome was being bombed. Famous art also had to survive Nazi looters, although we suppose it would have been difficult to stroll off with an entire ceiling. Number 5. Michelangelo's poem of Grievances. Since Michelangelo was candid about his lack of experience with painting, it stands to reason that he would be just as candid about the agony of making a massive painting in an uncomfortable position over the course of 4 years. What's great is that given the kind of temperament Michelangelo had, he couldn't just write a list of complaints. He needed to write the poem when the author was painting the vault of the Sistine Chapel, which he did in 1509. The language is so blunt that he opens by saying, "I've got a goiter for this torture," but at other times the imagery is more vivid and mythological. A real standout is, "My face makes a fine floor for droppings," referring to the paint that kept dripping in his eyes and nearly blinding him. He ends the letter with his now familiar lament, "I am not a painter." History disagrees though, Michelangelo. History disagrees. Number 4. Michelangelo painted it on his back, or not. One of the more popular facts about the painting of the frescoes was that Michelangelo was on his back atop 60 feet of scaffolding as he plied his craft. But this isn't actually true. Michelangelo was apparently standing most of the time. Other times he was, as described in his poem, hunched up there like a cat in Lombardy, breast twisted like a harpy. Under conditions like that, Michelangelo was probably half relieved when painting would have to be put on hold for issues like his client, Pope Julius II, going to war, or Michelangelo falling so ill that he almost died. Number 3. You can rent the place out. Most tourists, with their sweat, breath and skin, don't get to linger under the frescoes for very long, but on October 20th, 2014, Porsche enjoyed a historically unprecedented event. For a donation of $236,000 to Pope Francis's charity, Art for Charity, 40 Porsche big shots were allowed a prolonged private visit where they could really drink in the amazing art as part of a tour of Rome that the company was having. They also enjoyed some music, since the event was billed as a concert. The Vatican was quick to point out that you can't actually rent the Sistine Chapel, and that media outlets were using misleading language. They're merely reserving the chapel for art events to raise money for charities, so if you were planning a birthday do, you might want to change your plans. Number 2. The Brain Theory. Dan Brown's widely disparaged movies have made analyzing classic art pieces for hidden meaning seem farcical, but this theory's quite fun and doesn't have any deeper conspiratorial meaning beyond Michelangelo indulging his own interests. Starting in the early 1990s, Dr. Franklin Merschberger proposed that the fresco Creation of Adam is not simply a recreation of the Book of Genesis, but a tribute to the human brain. Supposedly, the red cloth behind God is in the shape of a human cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. So in essence, Michelangelo is saying that God isn't giving Adam life, but rather intellect. It's not universally accepted in academic circles, but it is consistent with the obsession over anatomical studies that pervaded Renaissance art for centuries. Number 1. Michelangelo's curious self-portrait. In 1537, 24 years after he finished the frescoes, Michelangelo returned to the chapel for a second job. He spent the next 4 years painting The Last Judgment, wherein God casts all sinners into the lake of fire. A lot had changed since he finished his first frescoes. The ruling family he had been loyal to, the Florentines, had been ousted by the Medicis. The painting came at a time now known as the Counter-Reformation, where the influence of the corrupt Clement VII was being felt and artistic expression like Michelangelo's nudes were about to be suppressed with fig leaves. In a climate like that, it's no wonder that Michelangelo decided to put himself into his final fresco for the Sistine Chapel at St. Bartholomew, a saint best known for being skinned alive. So while me, you, and millions of others might see a grand triumph of art in the Sistine Chapel, for Michelangelo, it was mostly just a sight of misery. So I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. And if you're looking for something else to watch right now, I've got another channel. It's called Biographics, where we do biographies of famous people from history in the present day. Do check it out. Link in the description below as well as on the screen now. And as always, thank you for watching.